Now that the Misty Mountain Gang has arrived in Australia, war has officially begun. White Tiger opens with his bloody roar to intimidate the small fries. But Australia's Beast Tide is not a pushover ragtag group of monsters. They have been converted and nurtured as loyal soldiers of darkness in the past few days. If an intimidating roar does not work, then why not try a goddamn hyper beam to mow them down, right? White Tiger's attack covers a massive conical area of destruction that vaporizes most of the weaker beasts. But he might have underestimated their intellect a little, as one sneaky canine beast managed to sneak to his right, aiming for the neck with its terrifying teeth. Fortunately, White Tiger is an absolute master of close combat. He clocks that canine beast before it can even take a nibble of his neck. You better not forget that there is one Australith in the mix too. This one likes using tentacles as his primary weapon. Those tentacles were heading directly for the oversized white kitty cat. If even one of these landed, it would be a massive problem. Fortunately, he did not crash this Beast Tide party alone. There is also the little panda coming in literally hot with a blazing fist. That fist landed devastatingly hard on the Australith's face, burning it up like it was hit with a descending meteor. The sheer force behind the punch was enough to knock the destruction beast out of balance, making it falter and fall on its back against the ruined city. Little Panda is fired up. He made a promise to himself that he wouldn't lose to another one of these bastards after he confronted one, and lost a few years ago back in Jiayao City. So, the main force of this initial clash would be the dumb-ass duo, Little Panda and White Tiger. Sure, they're not the brightest, but they are supremely reliable in fights. Up front was the cacophony of Australian beasts, primates, birds, marsupials, and insects. They have all kinds of freaks juiced up, thanks to the arrival of darkness. This would be the second wave of the Beast Tide. Little Panda was getting a little worried, as there weren't supposed to be this many enemies. They must have been attracted by the scent of human blood. Fortunately, the Beast Tide is not the only one getting the reinforcement treatment. The stable space nearby started cracking into pieces. When a dimensional rift was successfully created, the rest of the Misty Mountain's force started pouring out and stepping into foreign soil. Now that they had made their grand entrance, most senior general, the big sis of all, Ninetails, turned her ferocity on and ordered their army to kill every enemy in sight. This plan was formed a whole 2 days before in the Misty Mountains, before the Spirit Tide officially closed and stopped giving everyone that juicy free power-up dust. Godtree sensed the inevitable end of that seemingly endless drip of spiritual power coming. They only had a few hours left to make the most of it. He proclaimed that the second the tide ended, they would head straight to Australia. This will be the third full-scale war since the one between Australith and humans. The significant difference this time is the opponent would be infinitely more powerful. The stakes could not be higher as well. If they mess up and lose this war, Misty Mountain, along with every living being on this planet, will cease to exist. But regardless of the consequences, they must win this war no matter what. After Godtree's impassioned speech, all of his generals, absolute beasts that look up to and revere him, roared their hearts out in response. Now, they can't really take the plane to get into a foreign land. They don't have passports, and I'm pretty sure no airline would take them. So, Godtree will open its dimensions, and everyone will enter, according to their corresponding element. From there, he will bring everyone and travel through the void to rush to Australia in the shortest time possible. UZU opened his portals. Each one had a vibrant color, according to the abundance of their respective elemental affinity. Back to the present, Australia is starting to look more and more like a ruined land, filled with nothing but bleak fire and dust of destruction. It only took the Misty Mountain Force a few minutes to deal with the enemies at hand. With the heavy hitters entering the fray, the Beast Tide did not stand a chance at all, even if they had an Australith on their corner. King Gong surveyed the area for information and happened upon a guy clutching a metal stick in his hands, hunched over against the debris. It was the ordinary dad who went berserk after seeing the plane his little daughter boarded explode in the air. Qing Gong confirmed his death. He must have perished from the loss of blood after sustaining multiple wounds trying to fight the Beast Tide. Evst in the chat for the good dad. Ninetails made the call to move to the next coordinate they had planned, now that this city had been cleared. Before they moved on, they saw multiple dimensional rifts opening up from the skies, and Godtree's roots slowly emerging from within every single one. UZU was not going to let this Beast Tide go to waste, so he was taking everything, breathing or not, into his dimensions for evolution points. In the middle of the sky, you can see his main body watching everything from the most enormous dimensional rift. He was silently praising his subordinates for defeating a beast tide led by a full-powered Australith by themselves. Their growth in his absence was outstanding. In the Hua-Xia Federation, officials panicked after receiving reports that the mutant tree had disappeared along with the thick mist. They sent a team to investigate and found not a single powerful beast in the area. The head of state remained calm. He might have a few ideas as to where that enigmatic mutant tree has gone. In the Freedom Federation, they were receiving reports of a powerful group of spirit monsters descending on Australian soil. The statesman immediately went to the worst possible scenario, thinking that darkness had summoned yet another group of powerful beasts. Then, Hua-Xia relayed the information regarding Misty Mountain, and things finally started making sense. Mr. Statesman can't take this pressure. If a force of Misty Mountain had reached Australia, how would they have even done it in such a short time frame without being detected by anyone? Is the mutant tree so mighty that he can transcend logic and the laws of physics? Deep in a camp of darkness, a familiar set of winding roots has stepped foot behind enemy lines. Inside the body of the king of the continent, darkness excitedly welcomes his fated rival. Those winding roots belong to none other than our boy, Yuziyu, in his convenient demi-combat form. He made a specialized portal just to have a face-to-face with the big bad boss. The inner circle of Australia's beast force maintained their calm and practiced restraint. Kangaroo and the Purple Hood just observed, willingly sneaking behind enemy lines by breaking through the void as a baller move. This is the extent of God Tree's powers. Yuziyu turned to darkness. He taunted that with an ugly-ass one-eyed appearance. It's plain to see that darkness has absorbed the king of Australia. Darkness did not fall for the taunting, though he knew that our boy was trying to get him on edge. So he clapped back by saying that Godtree should have just hidden himself instead of showing up unprepared. Well, Yuziyu just snuck in here early to give a little warning and formally declare war. He promised to come and fight for real very soon, but before that, he wants the massacres to stop. Darkness did not like his tone at all. If there's anything this maniac hates the most, it's being ordered around. Godtree did not hold back. He wanted to see who had the bigger balls between the two of them. He advised that Darkness should properly enjoy the little bit of time he has left before everything comes crashing down.
Me personally, I wouldn't take this level of disrespect.
Godtree stood on a stone platform, facing Darkness and the entirety of its forces alone. The final boss is tired of all these mind games and mystifying tactics. He wants war and death. He sent one of his green tendrils towards the intertwined roots carrying Godtree's will and destroyed it in one fell swoop. The physical form might have been torn apart, but the message was compelling. Kangaroo, as stupid as he is, thought that Godtree was done for just like that the monster they had been gearing up for so intensely had died. Thankfully, Darkness has some common sense and knows that Yuziyu just sent a clone to taunt and mess with their heads before the final fight starts. Back in the separate dimension, Godtree opened his eyes. He was sharper than ever before. He ordered his forces to head back to his dimensional rifts as they were about to take off for the final battle. Back in Misty Mountain, the earthen spikes were still there, poking through the sea of trees, but the mist that made it so fearsome was gone. Human soldiers have stepped foot on the Forbidden Land for the first time in a long time. They were armed to the teeth, prepared for anything that could jump at them. But what they saw in the once Forbidden Land was even more bone-chilling than seeing your typical aggressive beasts. They immediately radioed over to headquarters to say that they had reached the location. The target has been confirmed to have disappeared. What they left was just a massive and unfathomably deep sinkhole in the middle of the woods. From above, the depth of the hole can't even be estimated. It was as if a whole underground city had been gouged out. The head of the Hua-Xia Federation was already expecting something like this to happen, so it wasn't too surprising. Still, there are way too many questions to be asked, and not enough answers to gather. In the Freedom Federation, the statesman has just received confirmation for the earlier reports. They still can't explain how Misty Mountain reached Australia, though. Moving a tremendous amount of force to a different continent in just a few short days is unbelievable. Just how powerful is this mutant tree, really? If it's him, maybe they can have the chance to beat the odds and vanquish the embodiment of darkness itself. Still, humanity needs to contribute, so the statesman asked for an update on their military preparations. This time, every country on the planet had gathered all transcendent humans. The Army, Navy, and Air Force are on standby, just waiting for the go signal to move out soon. If they lose, it's all over for humanity. It's all over for history and the world. They must win. On one of the many carrier ships, a belligerent voice was complaining about sitting on a toy boat for far too long, just to reach the action. Big Panda demanded to know how long it would take for them to touch shore, and the poor knight had to answer that it would take them 5 days, and that's already considered fast. Big Panda can't wait that long. He will swim over, so they can at least have some eyes on what's happening on land. He just can't wait to meet the one called Black Ball. The knight corrected Big Panda, the team leader, that the enemy's called Darkness, not Black Ball. On the other side of the ship, Gold Mask looked at humanity's forces in awe. The Navy is on standby, just waiting for the army. Every Transcendent has also gathered. The last time Australith came, most of Hua Xiao's forces were at the Sakura Kingdom. This time, they need to show the world who's boss. A veteran Transcendent commented that in his long career, it was his first time seeing such a large-scale gathering of military might. It is truly awe-inspiring. But even with this amount of force and troops, some were skeptical about if they could last a week. A week might even be optimistic. It would be considered a miracle if they could even last a day in combat. But even if that's the case, they still need to organize an effective preemptive attack. Everyone on board already accepted the fact that they are most likely exchanging their lives for the next generation's peace. While the soldiers were discussing their mortality, a commotion erupted in the middle of the ship. Hua Xia Federation's head of state made an appearance, his expression more intense than ever. Even Big Panda had to behave, seeing that the boss was here. But the knight still reminded his team leader to watch his words. The head of state told them to be at ease, as he just wanted to say a few words to the soldiers before heading to war. He stepped onto a makeshift podium so everyone could see and hear him. The soldiers were visibly shaken by the prospect of heading to a land filled with bloodthirsty, superpowered beasts waiting to have them for lunch. The head of state made that fear even more real by saying what could happen without sugarcoating it. In this war, there's a high possibility of losing their lives and crashing out. This combat mission is the first calamity of its degree that humans will be facing in all of history. All 14 states of Australia have been decimated. The enemy is an entity that could make something like destroying a continent in a few days happen. Fellow humans with families and friends died in that land. They have gone through enough suffering. They cannot allow their fellow brothers and sisters to continue living in fear. Humanity's history hinges on this battle. If they lose, everything will come to an end. There will be no Hua Xia. There will be no Earth. There will be no humanity. That's why even if they only have one living warrior, with Hua Xia blood still standing, the head of state implores them to fight till the bitter end. They need to do so, not just for themselves, but for the future that's waiting for peace. And so, he just had one more word to say that everyone must keep in their minds throughout the whole war: kill. The soldiers and Transcendent chanted that word until the air was filled with intense bloodthirst and determination.
Someone cooked here.
With the impassioned speech done, Big Panda bade his farewell as he swam for Australia. Upon hitting the water, the big guy did not stop paddling, just to reach the battlefield as fast as he could. The third spirit tide lasted for 1 month. The spirit cracks have closed up. Now, the mythical beast was brought down to the ground by force. Even with a successful wombo combo, the monarchs did not let their guard down. They couldn't afford to get complacent against an opponent this powerful. And they were right to do so. They pooled their strengths and timed their attacks right, but the Australian dragon still stood up with no problems. While the war was raging on, a certain someone was trapped in his own head. He was in the middle of a barren land, inarable soil with dead trees filling the ground. Everywhere he turned, his head was filled with death. Why has everyone disappeared? He asked with no hope of reply. It was so lonely and lonesome, not a speck of life in sight aside from him. As the rain started pouring down from the bleak skies, he wished he could have someone to play with. He just wanted someone he could talk to. With his tentacled form, he traveled the land tirelessly until he saw some smoke rising from a settlement. He finally discovered humans. Just seeing another form of life gave him hope. He loved it. The humans tilling the land, working tirelessly, and going about their day fascinated him. But when he made himself known to them, their inherent reaction was fear and disgust. This would be appropriate, as darkness is an endlessly hungry being, hungry for death and decay. Humans are merely things to consume for him. His bloody roars contained the unmitigated hunger and greed for flesh.
One eternity later.
Back to the present, Darkness extended his tendrils forward and grabbed Yuziu's demi-combat form, just like how he grabbed those humans to consume, but against the actual body of the god tree. This type of straightforward attack was practically useless. Darkness continued to go on the offensive by spitting out his nasty sulfuric acid. The putrid slime came out of his every pore. It looked and probably smelled foul. UZ, you just stood there, waiting for the putrid gel to reach the optimal distance. When he estimated that it was in the perfect spot, the counterattack started. With a wave of his vines, the air suddenly turned frigid and pushed the sulfuric acid back to where it came from. It also froze the ooze in place, rendering it useless. After neutralizing the enemy's attack, Godtree let out a guttural roar as his roots and body shifted and transformed. Using his absolute evolution ability, he entered his wolf form. Without wasting another second, he pounced on darkness and started going to town with his sharp fangs. He bit deep into that disgusting flesh and tore it apart with unprecedented force. But instead of heavily wounding the bastard, it seemed like he only angered the beast. The tendrils that Darkness had been using as a weapon for binding turned into fanged beasts that could cause some serious damage. Those tendril monsters pounced at Yuziu's wolf form in return, a fang for a fang. But with his improved control of absolute evolution, he was able to change into a turtle form with absolute defense. Seeing that puncturing attacks would be useless, Darkness held Yuziu in place and then started coalescing spirit power for a death ray. He unleashed that destructive beam of energy against Yuziu's turtle form at a brutal range. Every beast from Misty Mountain felt that something wasn't right inside that earth prison. They were connected with the God Tree in a profound way with the essence of life after all. Fortunately, the turtle form's defense was capable of tanking a death ray. Darkness even praised him for his superb body control. He attributed this adaptability to Yuziu's life as a former human. Well, he's been living as a tree for 5 years, and he's picked up a lot of tricks along the way. Darkness didn't like the fact that Yuziu thought 5 years was a long time, when he himself had been trapped in the abyss for an entire epoch. So when it comes to control over one's abilities, he has superior experience. If he was so proud of the past epoch he spent honing his skills, then Yuzi would gladly take this challenge seriously. He took his demi-combat form back to the main body, swallowing it whole, and activating 100% of his power. As soon as all this strength returned to one vessel, a qualitative and physical change started occurring. With his combat form that resembled a mythical beast in play, he planned to send Darkness back to where he was sealed for another epoch. Outside the Earth prison, the war between two beast factions was still raging on. The Australian dragon was having his revenge on the monarch beasts through skill and strength. While distracting the white ape with a dragon's breath, his tail had already extended to choke out the primate beast. He then proceeded to slam the poor guy on the ground mercilessly. Behind the white ape were the other defeated monarchs that have fallen from the might of the legendary monster. The Spider Queen might be down for the count with her injuries, but she still had the ferocity. She jumped out after feigning unconsciousness, surprising the dragon. But this sneak attack proved to be ineffective, as it only got her a massive hole in the middle of her body. After being pierced by the dragon's claw, she was discarded bloodily. The other monarchs were frozen in place. That could be them if they dared to move again with their injuries. But even if they tried, they might not get the chance to do so. A bigger dragon's breath was already heading their way, threatening to burn them to a crisp in one final shot. But before landing on the monarchs, the attack was deflected away to a different direction. The Australian dragon was blissfully unaware that his attack had been parried away. Up front was a beast that bore a striking resemblance to him. Misty Mountain's Thunder Dragon had made a clutch move and defended the injured monarchs. Even the kings and queens were surprised to see Thunder Dragon pulling up to their fight. Thunder Dragon politely apologized to his fellow monarchs as he requested to fight against the Australian dragon. His grown-ass flying lizard bum was his father after all. Imagine having beef with your dad, to the point of fighting to the death. Not far from this side of the field, Tyrannotititan was about to face a centipede beast with human hands for legs. White Tiger was having a screaming match with a reptilian monster. White Dragon was about to tussle with what looked like a flaming platypus. Upon closer inspection, you could see that this goofy fire beast looked a little bit like Psyduck. White Dragon was the type of fighter that thrived in intelligent fights, but it's hard to read the thoughts of someone without one. Firing off the Freezing Ray was the safest move to pull. Surprisingly, the platypus just stood there and did not even bother dodging the ice, or it might have been too slow to do so. It tanked the hit and paid for it, with some heavy wounds and a bleeding nose. It did not freeze, though. Before composing itself, the platypus was already being knocked away by White Dragon's tail swipe. It knocked the flaming platypus face first into the ground. The White Dragon charged in, eager to finish the enemy off to jump to a different battle. But that might not be too easy, as Mr. Platypus over here was getting really angry with all the beating. The little guy opened his mouth to spew his lava breath, the temperature around him increasing exponentially. But the result was a lackluster dribble of a paltry amount of lava, drooling a few centimeters to the ground. White Snake's freezing ray, on the other hand, was full of power and intense frigid energy. It was practically overkill, but it got the job done, encasing the little flaming platypus in sharp ice shards. Looking at the ice shards that froze off a decent chunk of the battlefield, this should be an easy win for the books. But the flaming platypus was about to prove that celebrating a little too early is a grave sin. A warm energy started gathering around his little body, slowly melting the sharp ice formation away. White Snake could feel the air getting hotter by the second, as the flaming platypus broke out of the encasement, seemingly like a different angry beast. He did not only melt through the ice, but he also busted out of that cold prison with a nuclear explosion. That explosion released a ton of lava into the nearby surroundings, alarming friends and foes alike. Seeing that this lava storm could kill a lot of their forces, Qin Gang hurriedly pushed his earth element manipulation to the limit. Using the strongest earth dome he could muster, they tried to tide through the lava storm, coming in like a tsunami. Lung Feng and his sister arrived to try to save Qin Gang and the rest from being completely engulfed by lava inside the dome. He was starting to get extremely worried about little White Snake's battle in the front. That little snake might be a dragon now, but this lava attack was something else. Fortunately, White Dragon managed to put up a defensive technique on time. An ice sphere effectively shielded her from damage. Half of her body was burnt by the lava. It could have been worse, had she not put up a defensive sphere on time. The flaming platypus proved that you shouldn't judge a book by its cover. Jumping onto another battle, the Tempest Wolves were struggling against the claws of their mismatched enemy. There was a hairy fellow standing on two legs with some sharp claws and an even sharper gaze, a freaking Australian werewolf. The answer to those claws lay in the golden blade of Misty Mountain's most badass fighter. Sparky had entered the fray to save the Tempest Wolves from being slaughtered for free. He might be an adept fighter, capable of slashing the strongest metals cleanly, but his blade could not make a dent against the werewolf's blocking arm. Sparky also sensed a strong spirit power being emitted from that hairy body, something unnatural. Instead of yapping, this beast just roared like a mindless monster. Sparky gave it another try, this time using his bare hands under the effect of triple amplification. With his sheer strength multiplied thrice, the impact the strike made was devastating. But as the dust settled, we saw that the werewolf was unharmed and a little more pissed off. He intended to respond with a claw attack of his own. Fist versus fist, this was the fight of real men, duking it out with just sheer force. The size might not have been a match, but Sparky could still push himself for a quadruple amplification. This time, his punch looked like it landed in the wolf's mouth. It was so fast and heavy that being hit would feel like taking an artillery round at point-blank range. Surprisingly, the wolf still had the presence of mind to shift his angle a little bit to dodge by a thin margin. Sparky was left wide open and paid for it. The wolf smacked him across the face. Being the absolute beast that he was, it did not even faze Sparky. With a quadruple boost, he landed an uppercut to the wolf's jaw. Opening up the dog's defenses, the golden ant went crazy with a barrage of punches with his strength boosted. The werewolf roared in pain as internal and external injuries started piling up. Then, as the final act, Sparky dug deep and went even higher. The absolute Giga Chad went up to a quintuple amplification. In response to Sparky's quintuple strike, the werewolf activated his boundless physique. You could say it was an unstoppable force going up against an immovable object. Their clash resulted in the destruction of the Rocky Canyon. In the end, the wolf threw up his guts and blood in agony. While he was uncontrollably coughing, the golden ant menacingly got closer, looking like the Grim Reaper. As a last-ditch effort to at least cause some damage before being finished off, the werewolf entered Berserk mode. Berserk definitely brought the monster's power level to another level, but it made him a little out of control. Sparky had to acknowledge that this big dog was a formidable foe. Jumping to another fight, we see a three-eyed creature going absolutely bonkers, with its tendrils slapping everything in sight. Little Panda brought out his game, the Crimson Lotus Solar Flare, summoning what looked like a miniature sun to the battlefield. He launched it directly at the Australis body, bypassing all the winding tendrils easily. The force behind that miniature sun was so powerful that it managed to pierce through the monster's body, burning a hole through it. As for the small-time Australian beasts, they were using superior numbers to attack en masse. Thankfully, Misty Mountain had some heavy hitters. who excelled in cleaving tons of enemies in one go. Chief among them was Demon Cao, with his battle axe imbued with the oppressive power of gravity. Up in the skies, the Peregrine Falcon faction was also showing that they're not just messengers, but also a destructive force with their bullet dives. They moved in the air so fast that they could pierce through beast skulls one after another without losing momentum. Even the vultures that rarely get screen time were providing cover fire with their meteor shower wings. From up in the air, they rained down free hits on the poor Australian beasts. Tyrannotitan must have grown tired of trampling down enemies physically, so he decided to switch to ranged attacks. You could make the argument that this method was even more efficient in erasing tons of cannon fodder enemies. Shingon linked up with the Ape faction to brawl with a diverse lineup of enemies on the front lines. Thorn and the Snake Girl teamed up, the latter turning enemies to stone, and the former shattering them with her crimson vines. The only path to victory was to concentrate their powers in hopes of overcoming the major deficit in numbers. The rescued kid from a few chapters ago had grown up to be a brilliant strategist, leading White Tiger and the rest of the Tiger tribe to mow down foes. Of course, our beloved trio of Bald Head, Gold Silk Monkey, and Demon Boar stuck with each other to beat some scrubs to death. The freaky two-faced spider was just glad that he could finally start a massacre. Ninetales and Kangaroo were in a world of their own, the #1 generals of both factions duking it out. Kangaroo was certain that they'd eventually get the dub, given their superior numbers, but the fiery Fox begged to differ. They might be at a disadvantage with a number of beasts alone, but Misty Mountains aren't the only ones opposing darkness. From above, nuclear warheads were deployed at breakneck speeds, homing in on the side of Australia's force. It was a controlled explosion that blatantly targeted those affiliated with darkness. Ninetales was correct in saying that the numbers didn't matter. Darkness had made an enemy out of the entire globe. Huashia Federation was the vanguard of the human forces at sea. Their massive aircraft carriers and warships paved the way. The captain ordered a continued barrage of everything they had on deck to destroy Australia's beasts while avoiding the forces of Misty Mountain. There might be a little bit of a problem, though. A few gargantuan presences surfaced from the depths. Tentacles of a sea monster disrupted the advancement of multiple ships by straight up destroying them. The aquatic beasts that Darkness brought in to collaborate with Australia's land monsters had finally made their move. Of course, this included the new 7 Kings of the Seas. 10 Nations Alliance was shoved into a tough position as the Deep Sea Kings surfaced on their side of the formation to prevent them from advancing further. With just one casual swing of a tentacle, a warship was split into 2, killing the crew. The ships in the vicinity started firing every firearm and explosive they had ready in an attempt to drive the Deep Sea Kings away. But their pathetic bullets were not even powerful enough to make a chip on any of the monster's scales. Some attack helicopters tried their hand at neutralizing the enemies with missiles. Thankfully, their specialized load was enough to make a lot of these slimy freaks scream out. The octopus Deep Sea King must have had enough of being humiliated by humans, so he prepared a destructive beam to thin the humans down a little bit. He blatantly targeted the major ships that carried most of the armaments. On the other hand, Yuwa country's battleships experienced the same explosive problems. Their ships on the right side were going down one by one, losing communication bit by bit. To make matters worse, some sea beasts had climbed up their prized ship, the Destroyer. On this side, the Crab King was leading the charge, and he looked immensely pissed off. The oversized crab bashed his pincer against one of the battleships and damn near tipped it over. It would have been over, if not for a golden apparition interrupting the next bash. The spiritual challenger who had once gone up against the Crab King was finally getting his rematch against the beast. He wouldn't let this seafood escape this time around. He summoned the entirety of his spiritual golden apparition, fully intent on decimating the crab. The giant golden Jesus apparition stood before the Crab King of the deep seas. I'm pretty sure this sentence has never been uttered in human history. Mr. Challenger would not let the 7 Sea Kings retreat back to their salty hideaways this time around. Back on the Octopus King's side, the poor tentacled bastard was facing multiple nuclear bombs, bringing imminent destruction. Once the first batch of explosives effectively detonated, new ones rose up. Yule, the master of magnetism, was controlling his country's entire nuclear arsenal with his powers. He had come to terms with the fact that humans might be insignificant, but they wouldn't sit and wait for death. Even Transcendent Johnny Sins was echoing the same sentiment while brawling with the bastards from the seas. The ruthless bishop flew among the aquatic beasts and delivered some holy retribution. With a menacing smile, he attributed this slaughter to the name of God. He vowed to eliminate everything that is evil. Heavy armor knights brought their all in honor of their swords, which would never yield. Man-made explosions from either technology or spirit power lit up the coasts. From a distance, Darkness felt that his 7 Sea Kings had started intercepting and fighting the humans in the water. Knowing this bastard, he would not let the chance to talk trash about the humans being on the back foot. This was not good news for Yuzi Yu at all. He needed those human forces to step up and contribute no matter what. Without warning, Darkness suddenly unleashed multiple beams of sickly light from his body. Yuzi Yu's demi-combat form was torn to shreds against the concentrated beams. Even so, it did not cause too much damage, leading Darkness to ask just how many forms he had. To answer that rhetorical question, Godtree summoned a seemingly infinite number of golden wisps in the air. Unsure of what was going on, Darkness fell for the attack, succumbing to the infinite explosions of the wisps. To continue the barrage of explosions, Yuzi Yu opened one of his dimensions where endless amounts of these explosive wisps had been gathered. The rain that pelted the villain's physical body was too much to bear. He had to use his tendrils in a desperate attempt to alleviate the pain. This left him open for Godtree's other attacks. Using his root, zoom in, and cutting the air with its sharpness, Darkness was trapped in a perilous position. 9 wood arboreal roots gave life to his every root, resembling hungry beasts frantic to bite into the body of Darkness. The combination of physical and explosive attacks completely overwhelmed the opposition. Yuzi Yu was not done yet. With his vines, he summoned every attribute he had an affinity with, which was almost every element out there, for a brilliant elemental offshoot. Multiple attributes specializing in different kinds of damage assaulted the final boss's senses. To add some icing on the cake, Yuzi Yu used Thunder Control, one of his most tried and tested attacks. It beckoned some divine thunder to descend from the skies, coalescing above the Earth Dome. The one-eyed freak was way too overwhelmed by the barrage of elemental attacks to even put up a defensive stop. When the divine thunder came to strike him down, the sheer destructiveness of the element slowly tore his body apart piece by piece. Ominous screams of agony filled the air as Darkness was consumed by the electrifying lights. Yuzi Yu was not taking any chances of a comeback now that he was clearly ahead. With the snap of a finger, he wanted more. Darkness was completely paralyzed, tanking the hits with just his body. Then came the second thunder that took on a draconic form. It was like the divine thunder had a life of its own. You can even hear its overwhelming roar as it descended to the ground. Purple lights engulfed the entire field. Darkness was absolutely cooked by this point. Being under so much pain and coming closer and closer to defeat reminded him of a child calling his pitch-black form disgusting for some reason. He was in so much pain, and here he was, reminiscing about something from the distant past. Yuzi Yu was confident that his combo of attacks would be enough to send this monster to where he belonged. Through the burn and agony of being engulfed by divine thunder, Darkness asserted that this world was where he should be with all his might. That scream must have awakened something within his dark heart that affected the field. Darkness successfully lived through the tribulation of thunder, even though his body was torn up beyond recognition. Tired of being trapped inside Godtree's home court, he extended his dark energy to all angles, shattering the Earth Dome to pieces. Now that they were back in the open air, the light of the night sky gave everyone a gruesome view of what remained of Darkness's body. Yuzi Yu must have expected that this ancient entity would still survive, but at least he was certain that Darkness was taking damage. The final boss took a moment to praise Godtree's outstanding pace of growth. Well, with the embodiment of death and Darkness as his opponent, he didn't really have any other choice than to push himself to the limits. As a reward for his perseverance and determination, Darkness wanted to give him a reward. He wanted to share a little personal secret. He confessed that he, too, possessed evolution points. They were more alike than any other 2 beings on the planet. Darkness scoffed and opened his dark system panel. He had this system panel under control, to the point of being able to show it to others besides himself. With just a single thought, the system asked him if he wanted to spend 10,000 evolution points to purchase the regeneration ability. Darkness's sick and twisted mouth curled into a sly grin as he answered yes. Yuzi Yu was shaken to the core. What the hell did that dark system panel mean? Well, as more essence of Darkness coalesced into the final boss's body, the dark system's capabilities were displayed at full capacity. Ditching the one-eyed form, Darkness turned into a gigantic humanoid beast with eyes for days. From now on, they would be competing to see who would run out of spirit power first. This bastard had 130 million evolution points saved up. Darkness finally revealed his humanoid form in all its glory. With his new form came the mood swings. He strongly asserted that he was the original offspring of this world, and he was more qualified than anyone to exist. Godtree ditched his demi-combat form and returned to his full combat form. With all the roots and tendrils in a bipedal body, the two actually looked alike. Sensing the urgency that comes with facing an opponent with infinite ways to mess him up, Yuziyu chose to use one of his most costly abilities, instantaneous to stop time for a few seconds. He knew he needed to finish Darkness off as soon as possible, or the consequences would be catastrophic. While time was stopped, he was supposed to assault Darkness with 9 wood arboreal roots, but he was interrupted by a green beam. The beam shattered his jaw, wiping out half of his face. This was not supposed to happen. Darkness knew the questions swirling inside Godtree's mind. Time was supposed to be on pause, so why was this bastard still moving? It was just surprises one after the other at this point. Well, the answer was simple. Darkness used his system to purchase the Nullify skill at the cost of 500,000 evolution points. On top of that, he purchased an ability called Imitation. That green beam from earlier was a copy of 9 wood arboreal roots. He was using Godtree's signature move against the Godtree himself.
I don't like where this is going.
To make matters worse, it looked like his version was a lot more powerful and polished as well. As his rigid limbs crumbled to pieces, Yuziyu was at a loss for words. Thankfully, Yuziyu left a little something on the ground Darkness was standing on. A little booby trap was set to unleash an upward explosion of golden lights that brought unbearable pain. Yuziyu quickly regenerated his missing limbs and seized control of the battle's pace. Darkness's humanoid form was severely damaged, as that trap was a light elemental skill. Other than the clear element, Godtree should be able to control every other attribute. While they couldn't quite grasp the water element just yet, either. As for the dark element, he could just kill Darkness, and naturally possess the highest affinity for it. Darkness actually felt a little jealous that Godtree could possess abilities, as he could only purchase one-time use abilities using evolution points. But the bright side was that he had access to an endless library of abilities, and innate talents within reach with a single thought. Darkness wanted to explain his ability in full, and he knew of a way to give Yuziyu a sense of his capabilities in full effect. Before Godtree could make another move, the two of them were suddenly trapped in a synthetic prison. This, too, came from Darkness's endless number of abilities, available through the purchaser system. The way he gained evolution points was different, too. He didn't have to go around killing to obtain them. He could just use subordinates to do the dirty work. That's precisely why he sent the Austroliths all over the globe to kill as many humans as possible. In a place like a war zone where creatures would fight to their deaths, creatures that died would automatically become his evolution points. You could say that his evolution points were infinite. He was a creature that thrived in death. After explaining his overpowered system, Darkness purchased a lava physique for 300,000 evolution points. Using his magma tendrils, he launched another attack. Yuziyu took up a defensive stance and reinforced his body with crystallization. The magma tendrils made a direct hit, but Godtree's defense held up. He roared out of the dust clouds and counterattacked. He called in a gigantic avalanche to freeze everything it touched with the Ice Age. Darkness answered with Dark Blade, a sonic attack typically used by dragons. It was the perfect counter to shatter the Ice Age into a million little crystalline pieces. Then he purchased another skill for a measly 30,000 evolution points. Can you guess what that would get him? Freaking gravity manipulation. Demon Cow's ace in the hole. With gravity weighing Godtree down, dodging the next attack would be next to impossible. So, Darkness spent a crisp 50,000 evolution points and pointed to the heavens above. He called out the Divine Tribulation that tore his previous body apart and hammered down the thunder control against Godtree. It consumed Godtree's body as Darkness watched intently. Once the smoke had settled, Yuziyu was revealed to have withstood the barrage of elemental attacks in one piece, thanks to crystallization. Darkness was in a chatty mood right now. He wanted to confess why he wanted humans to fight against the Godtree. It wasn't because he was afraid of humans, as Yuziyu initially thought. Darkness just wanted to play with them, because he detested every single human. He wanted to toy with them, and watch them fall into the abyss. In the middle of an intense fight, this fool sat down, and asked if Godtree had ever experienced despair. He was just asking, because he intended to make Yuziyu experience the pits of despair like never before. The story of Darkness began way back at the end of the Cretaceous period, 65 million years ago. That's right, he came from a meteorite that landed on the planet, when dinosaurs still roamed the Earth. His arrival on land caused quite a stir. He was trapped inside a massive rock at that time, and that rock made an extremely powerful impact. It was so powerful that it triggered the extinction event that killed dinosaurs. Damn! Darkness was just a tiny, discolored debris at this point in time, just another piece of sediment. Inside that dark-colored rock, a shadowy figure slipped away. Before vanishing, the figure prayed for him to live on no matter what. It was his mother. He arrived on the planet with his mom, but she did not get to stick around for unknown reasons. Before disappearing, she felt assured that on this planet, her son would definitely find someone to rely on. And so, darkness remained dormant on this piece of dark rock. It didn't matter if it rained so hard that the planet's water level rose. It didn't matter when the Ice Age arrived and covered everything in unbearable cold. It didn't matter when the explosion of life happened and plants conquered the planet with their numbers. No matter what era it was, the rock stood solid and sturdy. That was until an ordinary tree grew around it for years, seemingly hugging the dark rock in a warm embrace. Once inside the growing tree, the dark rock opened akin to an egg hatching. He slowly shed the nature-worn exterior, with the help of the tree's embrace. Inside was darkness, unaware of his purpose, his origin, his past, and his future. He stumbled out of the tree and came upon humans for the first time. It was the little girl from his vision before. She didn't fear him for his bizarre appearance. She was just curious about the weird animal she stumbled upon. This was Darkness's introduction to the world, his first encounter with another being. The little girl decided to raise him and named him Blackie. It didn't take long for them to grow close as two beings could be. She taught him how to live and how to feel joy. She was clumsy, always getting into trouble for the sake of fun or survival. He would always have to step up, so she didn't get harmed. They lived in the woods for quite some time, and they lived well. Blackie even learned how to cook fish perfectly. But no matter how hard he tried, his little ball body just rejected the taste of anything he tried consuming. Winter came, and they accidentally barged into a bear's territory. By this time, Blackie was adept enough in combat that an average bear wouldn't stand a chance. He might have been a formidable force in these woods, but the young lady still insisted on doing stuff herself. One thing she liked doing with his help was flying in the air. Blackie would take her to the edge of the woods and help her traverse the lands up above. At night, she would rest peacefully while he kept his eyes open. Both of them had never felt more secure in their short lives. This routine went on for 2 years, until one fated day on the cliff they used to practice flying in. By this time, Blackie had learned how to speak the human tongue, and the young lady had become disillusioned and abusive, demanding Blackie change and grow stronger for some reason. She didn't like looking at her friend anymore, as he reminded her of the first time they met. In her village, they sent 2 people to the palace to be palace maids every 2 years. Those chosen would enter the lowest caste in society and take on endless degrading tasks. She was afraid of such a life and would do anything to avoid being chosen. So, for the past 2 years, she stole, toiled, and saved a bit of silver to bribe the palace unique, in hopes of being excluded from the list. In that case, little Blackie and the young lady would still be able to meet every day. The very next day, Blackie waited in the woods with utmost optimism, but his friend, Ling Ling, was taking a long time to return. Back in the village, Ling Ling humbly kneeled before the palace unique, offering her coins as a bribe. Shigen packaged it with a bright smile, thinking that her efforts would be enough to sway the decision. The unique smiled at the offering, the greed in his eyes evident. He took the coin bag and weighed it in his hand. Sensing how light it was, the unique threw Ling Ling's savings right back at her. The bastard was offended to receive a miserable bag of a few lousy bronze coins when he was expecting a bag full of silver. He asserted that having someone like Ling Ling in the palace would only spoil the atmosphere. So, he decided to execute her right there and then, to serve as a warning to others who might have the same pathetic idea. As soon as the soldiers drew their blades, Ling Ling made a run for it. She reached the entrance to the woods before the soldier caught up, slicing down with all his might. Blackie was too far to intervene. Ling Ling was brutally struck down by the orders of a corrupt palace official. The other villagers immediately distanced themselves from Ling Ling for fear of being implicated. Even the unique could see that they were just saving their own skin. He ordered the soldier to cut Ling Ling's head off for the palace report. Just as the blade was about to separate her head from her body, she weakly called for her friend. With darkness making it before the blade landed, the one that was beheaded was the soldier. The unique and the villagers couldn't comprehend what they were looking at, but it struck fear in their hearts. This was the day that little Blackie embraced the darkness, the day of his first kill. The anger and adrenaline of taking a human life must have unlocked his capabilities. In fear and confusion, the unique ordered the remaining soldier to kill the creature. The poor soldier didn't even get the chance to move when darkness swallowed his head whole. With the armed forces taken care of, the palace official was left alone, defenseless. Afraid of getting their heads lopped off, the villagers ran away as fast as they could. At this point, darkness was so full of rage that he would not let anyone escape. His body extended in every angle, strangling and stabbing the villagers at will. Try as they might, darkness was just too fast and too brutal. One shot, one kill. The body count continued to rise as darkness fell deeper and deeper into depravity. Cries of agony filled the air. The palace official started begging for his life. He was so afraid that he even peed his pants. The fool swore to give darkness whatever he wanted, as long as he got spared. That wasn't going to cut it at all. Darkness paid special attention to this scumbag. The only thing he wanted out of this bastard was to die. Darkness used his malleable body to constrict the unique and tighten up until blood and gore were squeezed out. In just a few minutes, everyone who did his friend dirty joined Ling Ling on the floor, lifeless. For the first time in his life, Darkness felt his tears welling up. Now that he's taken revenge, he just wanted Ling Ling to wake up. No matter how much he screamed and cried, she didn't move. Then, the trees, grass, animals, and insects around the area started dying. It was at this moment that the Dark System panel made its first appearance. With the system activated, he would be able to use the ability Era Change to activate the spirit power source. He reckoned that using this thing would make it possible to bring Ling Ling back to life. Upon activation, he saw a rundown of his profile. Name, darkness, race, none. His innate talent converts dead creatures to evolution points, while Purchaser allows him to buy skills. He so desperately wanted to bring his friend back to life, so the system offered absolute recovery for 10,000 evolution points. With 15,000 in the bank, he was able to use absolute recovery on Ling Ling. Upon sensing the breath of life coming back to her body, Darkness jumped into her embrace. He thought he was going to be all alone again. He wouldn't be able to take that. Ling Ling pulled him into a hug and swore that she would never abandon him. Feeling the safety of her warmth lulled him into a false sense of security. Darkness got his little body torn up by a blade. Ling Ling had picked up the soldier's sword and stabbed it right into her friend. She saw the kind of cruelty Darkness was capable of. Ling Ling steeled her resolve to end Darkness before things got worse, but it was too late by that point.
Are you serious right now, bro?
Back to the present, that little ball of innocence had started the biggest war that humanity had ever faced. Behind the battleships of every significant international power, a big black ball of spikes emerged from the water. Eula and his transcendent soldiers were the first responders. A beast with a pitch-black body and his singular crimson eye. It was bigger than any of the 7 Sea Kings. There was no doubt about it, this was an offshoot of Darkness itself. This sea urchin-like darkness form immediately started gearing up for a hyper beam. Eula hurriedly ordered his men to get the fleet out of the monster's attack range before it was too late. Well, by the time he finished giving out orders, it was too late. The hyper beam plowed through dozens of battleships in the fleet, clearing them out and their respective crews in one shot. Fire and smoke went up on the surface of the sea. It wasn't looking good for humans. Eula looked back to his precious force going up in flames without being able to do anything about it. By the initial estimations, it looked like 10% of their total forces had been destroyed. This also made it harder to push forward due to all the debris. The heavy armored knight, who was taking it easy on the ship in the middle of the pack, waiting to land on the beaches of Australia, was met with a sobering sight. Even more of these sea urchin darkest monsters emerged from the water and were now spreading between fleets. The cruel bishop looked behind him, even if he was a merciless killing machine. In the name of God, he was still part of the human team in a precarious situation. These sea urchin monsters stood as tall as some of the aircraft carriers they had brought out. They armed the heaviest artillery weapons in tow and aimed at the spiky balls of darkness in an attempt to blast them out of the way. Eula couldn't afford to let these pesky creatures destroy even more of their battleships. They hadn't even reached the mainland. Back in the real war zone, we finally witnessed the battle between father and son, dragon to dragon. It looked like Thunder Dragon had been pushed to the brink of defeat in the few minutes that we weren't paying attention. His father was one tough cookie. He tried to communicate, but the Australian dragon only gave him low roars in response. Every time he tried to close the gap and deal some damage, the big bum would always respond with a brutal physical attack. This time, a backup appeared to spare Thunder Dragon from even more wounds. Zi-Leon, the bug of the void, had interfered to test his strength against a mythical beast. He knew why Thunder Dragon was getting beat up. He asserted that if the young dragon continued to show mercy, death would be inevitable, regardless of blood. It looked like the young dragon wasn't the only one getting reinforcement. A white rhino with ornate horns came on the scene, hungry for blood. The big bastard roared menacingly as it charged forward. Elsewhere, the mutant rats were effectively chowing down some small and mid-sized monsters. They become efficient fighters. Compared to what they looked like in their first missions to dig an underground city and assassinate humans, they looked a lot more ferocious now. But they might have just walked into the biggest mismatch of the century. An even bigger rat had entered the fray to stop the mutant rats from picking off beasts so freely. Lung Fong knew who this was. This was Australia's giant rat king. It unleashed a terrifying squeak that made the whole battlefield tremble. Even Little Panda, fresh from another victory against an Australith, didn't like seeing a cane-rank creature appearing and disrupting their pace. And worse news was coming. The Australiths that had survived the fight thus far were starting to start their evolution process. It looked like they figured out how to expedite turning into that horrific moth and transforming one by one. Little Panda thought you would just be dealing with that weird beam-like form, not the complete beast. And it wasn't just one. All of the remaining Australiths had reached their full potential in one go. Still, Little Panda was not one to back down when faced with seemingly impossible odds. He had Divine Flower, the Tiger Tribe, and many more standing with him to face this challenge. Little Panda led the courageous charge, diving headfirst into battle. Did they even stand a chance against these bugs? It took Godtree's full strength to take one down a few years ago, right? Back in the main boss battle, UZ was insulting Darkness for having such a corny trash talk game. Aside from that, Darkness revealed that while Godtree was recruiting powerful subordinates, he was also making a lot of preparations. Back in the sea, Golden Jesus was tanking the Crab King's pincer attacks without issues. But the crab must have wised up and attacked the challenger, controlling the apparition himself. The bishop also found himself teaming up with Golden Jesus, but the crab proved to be a much tougher opponent than they initially thought. He was gritting his teeth and enduring the internal injuries, without even being able to go on the offensive. The percentage of destroyed fleets continued to rise. The sea was slowly turning into a sea of fire. Yule tried his best to prevent any more damage. He even used the metallic debris from the sunken ships as his weapons. But these sea urchin-looking creatures were just too tough. They were able to take down a few, but it required an astronomical amount of effort. In the Freedom Federation's fleet, the casualty report was currently undetermined, but their entire second fleet in the middle had been sunk. Based on the current situation, it was unclear whether they could even hold on for another 10 minutes. This is what Darkness meant when saying that the most foolish thing one could do is to work with humans. From the start, Darkness had drafted the 7 Sea Kings from different species on every continent. Whether it was quantity or quality, his army was miles above Godtree's. The result of this battle was already set in stone. But UZ didn't see things like that. Humans might be weak, but they've always had the ability to shake things up with unexpected intelligence. This time it might come in the form of a certain Flame Empress. Xia Ling had finally rounded up her Dark Council to join her master's side. Darkness was wrong in thinking that humans were the only ones Godtree enlisted. Now, we'll see the power of genetic hybrids.